Oreo, the labyrinth city, city of gold, city of adventures, the city of dreams. Oreo has many titles, and all of them well-deserved. A city where one who dreams of wealth, power, women, drink, food can find what they seek. A city where adventures could be had every single day. A city to make plenty of coins. A city where getting lost was even easier than making said dreams a reality. This is where we find our hero in the making, Cranel, a young man, 18 years old, short for his age, with a small stature. He has short and scruffy white hair and dark red eyes. He was lightly built, not much muscle definition, though by no means was he weak, though strong wasn't an accurate characteristic either. Cranel, following the death of his grandfather who was his last living relative, or so he is aware of, trekked across the country in search of adventures and a new life. Following the path that his grandfather had wished for him, Bell found his way into Oreo in the middle of the night. Paying the expensive fee just to enter as well as following the directions given to him by one of the guards, Bell found his way to the guild as the sun began to crest over the mountains and the tall walls of the city, bathing the tower in an almost godly glow, as if the tower was the heavens. And this is where we begin our story, a story of a soon-to-be legendary hero, whose life we may already know, but this time, it changes, all because of several choices made by our protagonist. Due to how early in the morning it was, being daybreak, the line wasn't as bad as it normally was. Only having to wait 5 minutes, our white-haired hero-to-be walked up to the tellers, a big grin on his face. In front of him was a beautiful elf. If Belle had to guess, it was a half-elf. She had a very slim body, which meant her chest and backside was also on the small side, though it didn't remove her beauty, if only enhanced with her natural frame. She had shoulder-length brown hair and emerald eyes. Bell only had one word in mind when he saw her. Beautiful. Shaking his head, he gave her a great big grin as the child was an absolute bliss. He was one step closer to realizing his dream and making his grandfather, may he rest in peace, proud. His grandfather was a man of many things. A pervert, a philanderer, a father, a leader. He was the most amazing person that Bell can think of, for his grandfather had raised him for as long as he could remember. He didn't really remember his mother or father, but the sadness around that was long past. He had his own life now to live, and he was going to live it to the fullest. My name is Bell, and I want to be an adventurer. Can you help? The young man said excitedly, bouncing on his heels. The half-elf was hard-pressed to not smile at the enthusiastic greeting that she had received from someone who was new to the city. My name is Tool, and I will gladly be of assistance. Now first things first. Who is your familia? Familia? Bell asked, tilting his head. I don't know what that is, but I am afraid I don't have one, he said. The way his head tilted made Ina blush a bit from the single word that crossed her mind. Could. She shook her head and smiled. I'm afraid that you cannot enter the dungeon and become an adventurer without a familia. I'm sorry about that, Bell, but I can give you a map and list of familia so you can find one to join, she offered. Bell smiled brightly and nodded. Okay, I will be back before you know it with me in one. I promise. How hard could it be? He said proudly. Ina didn't have the heart to tell him the reality, so she just handed him the map of the city as well as all the familia recruiting stations. Bell dashed out with a big wave. Thank you, Miss Ina, he said with a big grin. Love you, he cried without thinking, as he ran off into the city that was beginning to properly awaken. All around Ina, whoops, whistles and snickers were heard. She could hear all the whispers and rumors beginning to spread about her and the new guy. She blushed softly, placing her right hand on his cheek. Ah, he doesn't really know what he said. So cute. An hour later, Bell came to a stop in front of a massive gate with the words Loki spelled out in the steel frames of the gate. He raised his map up and smiled. On the map was 10 cross-outs. Freya, Hephaestus, Hermes, Astrea, Apollo, Artemis, Iclos, Mayak, Demeter, Bridget. With a good chunk of the familias having rejected him, one would have expected for the poor lad to be heartbroken and downtrodden, but he was still smiling brightly. This is the one. I know it. Outside of the gates was a large folding table, placed with large amounts of papers in multiple stacks. There was a line in front of the table, as well as a single werewolf sitting down on a folding steel chair with a toothpick in his mouth. He had his arms crossed and a glare set on his face. He didn't want to be there, which was evident to nearly everyone except maybe Belle, who was a bit naive. 10 minutes later, the line died down and Belle stood with a big smile on his face. "Hello. I am Belle Cranel, and I want to be a part of your familia." "Scream kid. Get lost. We don't need you here." "Yeah? Don't want you one dash. I said beat it. We don't need weaklings in his familia. Come back when you become something worth a damn." The werewolf interrupted. Belle wasn't deterred just yet, so he continued to speak. "I can become strong. I just need a chance. How many times do I have to tell you? Beat it, kid, or I'll beat you instead," he said, getting up and snatching the front of Belle's shirt. Belle looked absolutely terrified as tooth and nail came evident. "We do not need some snot-nosed weaklings in here. This is a place for heroes and actual adventurers. You do not belong here, and you never will. Do you get it now?" "Scram," the werewolf said before tossing Belle several yards away with a single backhanded throw. Belle scrambled to his feet and ran away, not looking back as tears began to fill up. "So many familias, and no one wants me. Not even the smaller ones," Belle thought, a tear falling down his right cheek. Night fell, and the map that was given to him by Ina was nearly completely crossed out. Only 2 familias remain, but the poor lad has no more hopes to even join. After the rejecting from the Loki familia, Belle no longer had a smile or the exuberance he arrived with. The vehement denial from the beast man completely destroyed the boy's excitement about joining a familia. Collapsing in the bed of the inn he rented for the night, anger began to slowly dissolve the sadness he felt, filling his heart with a different determination. Not one of vengeance, or at least directly. "I will get strong. I will show that man who is really strong. I will become the strongest in all of Orrio," Belle declared, deep in his heart. As sleep slowly came, a plan began to form, for Belle was destined to become unstoppable. The next morning came, and with a fresh heart, Belle got up with a big smile. He was going to do something stupid, dangerous, and illegal, but he knew that it was his only way forward at this point. Little did he know, this decision was going to set him on a path he would least expect, for a certain deity was saying goodbye to their children who were going off on an adventure deep in the dungeon. And when this deity's children went off and left them alive, they got bored. And when they get bored, well, let's just say it sucks to be anyone in their path. Arriving at the guild, Belle began to look around for guards, the entrance to the dungeon, and any other obstacles, including the quickest path of egress should something go wrong. Using his natural agility, Belle made his way without alerting anyone, most of all being that of Ina, who was, oddly enough, not having much of a line at all, so she was able to do some paperwork or look out at the lobby. Luckily, she didn't spot the white-haired young man. He entered through the doorway of the dungeon with a giddy smile, jogging down the stairs with a skip in his step. I'm here, Grandpa, where I can make our dreams come true. True love, adventure, romance, adventure," Belle said excitedly. As he made his way to the bottom of the steps, he stopped and looked around. He was in a long yet wide tunnel, with ceilings at least 30 feet in height. His mouth was open in awe, his eyes glued to every bit of detail he could see. How the rocks changed colors the higher up the ceiling they got, or how many different lengths of stalactites he could find. Crack. A foreboding sound, one that sent the hairs on Belle's neck into a frenzy, standing straight as if electricity has just coursed through his body. Those used to the sounds would be better prepared, ready and eager. They would know what that sound meant. A monster was awakening. Belle turned slowly to see a single goblin, a short and stumpy green creature, armed with razor-sharp claws, a rudimentary axe made of bronze. Big bulging eyes. It was something out of a child's nightmare. Belle took a deep breath and gulped down his nervousness and a wad of saliva. He let out the breath before taking out his weapons. Belle Cranel was actually very well armed this time around. 2 large daggers. Each dagger had a foot-long straight blade, with each side of the dagger sharp like a razor. The tip was sharp as well. Each had a cross guard about 2 inches on each side of the handle, protecting his hands from accidental slippage onto the sharp blade. Could conveniently provide some defense against other blades or sharp weapons, like claws. He was some armor on his body as well. He had leather shin guards that went over his boots, strapped to his ankle and upper leg, right below the knee. Attached to the shin guards was another leather piece, which was a knee guard. Flexible due to several straps of leather that attached the knee guards to the chin guard. The knee guard also was strapped above to a 2-inch band of leather that wrapped around the thigh, keeping the knee guard in place during movement. With a very small leather cuirass that only provided protection of his chest, leaving his stomach unguarded. He wore a t-shirt underneath this armor, providing no protection. He wore a thin jacket on top that provided no protection but looks cool and protected against rain and wind. The jacket was worn loosely, providing vision of his armored chest. The jacket was a long-sleeve jacket, which covered the view of his wrist and forearm guards. These were also made of leather, this time a darker leather. They wrapped around his wrists and the lower part of his hand, forming a form of glove, though stopped well below his knuckles, though it wrapped around the knuckle of his thumb. This gave him supreme agility with good hand protection of his wrist. Underneath his jacket was a very thin chain, not strong enough to be used for any sort of locking purpose. The chain was about 1/2 inch in length and 1/4 inch in width. It was wrapped around both of his biceps, hidden from view. This was another set of his weapons, 2 chains with many uses. Setting into a stance, he waited until the goblin turned its attention to him and moved at him. Bel's eyes widened at the speed the goblin had, moving rather quicker than expected for such a frame. He gasped and jumped back just in time to dodge a swipe at his chest. Damn, I need to not underestimate these monsters. Just because I am human doesn't mean I am faster than all of them. He cursed. It's not that he was slower than the goblin, for he was faster. He just didn't expect the goblin to have such speed. The goblin once again charged at Bel, who had backed up against a wall to provide him some solace that his back was protected. Once again, Bel dodged to the side with a step and a jump, dodging in the nick of time for the goblin's hand to pass through right where his head was, only for the claws to sink into the rock. Got you now, Bel cried. The goblin was stuck in place, trying to pull its claws out, but it was too late. With quick stabs and slashes befitting that of an assassin, Bel dispatched the goblin with a dagger to the upper back right in the heart and one in the side of the throat. Turning into ash, the goblin disappeared and left behind a single crystal. A big grin spread across Bel's face. Ha ha ha. Ha ha. Grandpa, you see this? I am one step closer to the goal. He roared out into the air with excitement. Walking past him were several adventurers of the Loki familia, including the werewolf. Hearing the jubilant cries of a man, the Loki familia turned their attention to the cries, seeing the back of a young man, holding a crystal up into the air with pride. Many of the group smiled, thinking back to their own beginnings. The werewolf, on the other hand, huffed. Damn annoyances. Hate weaklings, man, he complained, letting out a sigh. A few distasteful glances were sent his way, but no one said a thing. Luckily, Bel was too busy cheering to pay attention to his surroundings. He paid no attention to the party that was diving deep into the dungeon today. Exiting the dungeon, Bel had stayed down for a few more hours after killing his first goblin, slaughtering more and more of the green creatures. He had a bag full of small crystals, smiling like a goof. It was in this happiness that he didn't pay attention. Ina had spotted him, exiting the dungeon and counting crystals no less. Bel Cranel, I know that isn't what it looks like, shouted the half-elf, her cheeks puffed in anger. If it wasn't for how terrified Bel was that he was caught, he'd have found her very cute when she was angry. Utilizing the egress plan he made in the morning, Bel darted out of Babel, escaping before Ina could stop him. Bel? She thought worriedly. Bel collapsed onto the bed with a laugh. His eyes closed but his smile a mile wide. He could get used to this feeling. The rush of combat, the rush of victory, the thrill of getting loot. Oh, it was unlike any other feeling. What a rush. He placed the crystals into the drawer, stashing them away until he could cash them in. He would dive into the dungeon, get stronger, find a familia, and then crash out all the crystals he could. Oh, the plans. A few hours later, After some dinner from the inn, Bell fell into a deep and relaxing slumber. Tomorrow was another day, where he would go deeper into the dungeon than the day prior and gather more experience. Morning came rather quickly. Most would hate the idea that the next day had arrived, disrupting their lovely dreams. But Bell was living his dream. A dream of adventure and combat. Sure, there were some parts of the dream missing, like going to bed with a beautiful woman after a night in the dungeon, enjoying the pleasures of the flesh before falling into a blissful sleep holding said woman close. But it was close. He was getting closer to the main dream, and that was all it took to get him from the bed, eager to start another day. After some breakfast and another plan of egress made after staking out the guild lobby, he noticed that Ina had a much longer line this morning. With a grin, he snuck his way into the dungeon once again. It took him only half an hour to clear the first 2 levels of the dungeon. Goblins made for easy prey due to how dumb they truly were. They had no tactics or skill, providing him the victory. Arriving on the 3rd floor, Bell first noticed that the dungeon colors had changed. From the dark dirt brown came a light purple color. More crystals were found strewn about, providing extra lightning compared to the other 2 floors. The temperature was also colder than above, giving a slight chill when a breeze drafted through. Hearing the telltale signs of monsters being born, Bell took his daggers and got ready. Crack, crack, crack. Bell could have never known. But monsters don't play with rules. There were no fair fights. If they could gang together, they would. Out from the walls came 3 kobolds. He's fought only one before, as the rest were goblins, and he knew that this was going to be a hard fight. Bell's eyes widened at the sight, his legs slightly shaking in fear. Kobolds were much faster than goblins, with hearing. Their eyesight was worse, but their hearing made up for it. These creatures would follow him in his dodges, making things very difficult. And now there was 3. With a gulp, Bell had little time to act. The kobolds attacked. With all 3 coming at him from the front, he knew a dodge to the side was not going to work. Or was it? With a quick thought, he dodged to the right with a step and a jump, only for the kobolds to turn mid-rush, changing direction to the human. Bell was right to take the risk, though. The 3 kobolds were not naturally skilled to work together. They were just babies after all, so to speak. When the first one turned, the other 2 did as well, only for 2 of them to trip on one another, leaving the one closest to Bell to be the only one to act. The fur provided some protection to Bell, but not against his weapons but to knowledge. Bell had no idea where on the body the kobold's weak spots were, so he was unable to do any body damage when the kobold came rushing in with an overhead slash. Dodging slightly to the right, avoiding the overhead slash, Bell responded with a backhanded slash with his left hand. A deep cut appeared on the kobold's face, right below his right eye. This only enraged the dog-headed creature, who came at Bell with a vengeance with twice the rage. Bell stood his ground, but this proved to be a mistake. The other kobolds were back on their feet and joined their brother in their attack. Lifting his daggers up to try and block, Bell yelled in pain as he felt the small dagger like claws slash his right pinky finger. He leapt backwards after that, looking down at his finger. His eyes widened. The damage was more severe than he thought, but it wasn't broken, nor was bone visible. The cut was deep and hurt badly, weakening the hand that was holding his right dagger. He looked up from his finger and had to dodge back and to the side multiple times as the kobolds didn't give him a chance to recover from the damage they dealt. Over and over he had to back away, only for his back to collide with the wall. This is not where I fall. Bell, though, using the wall like a springboard, he kicked off and leapt over the kobolds who collided with the wall with a loud thud. With a grit of his teeth and a click of his tongue, he flexed his wrist and his arm, the chain coming down his arm before connecting to each of his daggers with a click. Up on the surface, a certain red-headed deity was making their way into Babel Tower. With a big grin on their face after spotting Ina, the deity approached the half-elf who was finishing up with her last customer before she would take her lunch break. "I and Nana, I'm bored," the deity whined, which only got the half-elf to sigh. She didn't even need to look up to know who was approaching. "Loki, you can't just keep coming in here and bothering the workers here every time your familia goes off on an adventure. But they are all Goonoon, and it's so boring without anyone. Come on, show some heart." Will you dash? Loki, you need to find something else to entertain you then, and no, I am nor is anyone else here a suitable target for your insatiable desires for excitement. Ina replied strictly. Well, what can I do then? I'm bored, Ina. Help me. Loki whined. With a grit of her teeth, Ina let out a sigh. Would you like to join me for lunch then? My treat? Booze included? Loki asked, perking up after having been draped over the counter. It's barely 11 in the morning. So yes? Ina sighed and nodded. Hooray. Let's go. Loki exclaimed, getting up from laying across the counter. The kobolds were back on their feet and charged at him with a cry, but Bel was ready. Flexing his wrists out, the daggers flung out of his hands, with 20+ feet of chain behind it. This was Bel's secret weapon. He was skilled with his daggers and preferred using them by themselves, but the chains were an addition to his daggers like cheese is to bread. His skill with the chains was good, but it used up a lot more energy than Bel liked. But in times like this, it was crucial. Wielding the chains like whips, using wrist movements and pressing his palm against a section of chain to make the chain turn, Bel turned the area around the kobolds into a maelstrom of chain and blade. Aya! Bel screamed out as he began slashing the 3 kobolds up, keeping them from making any proper advances as many cuts began appearing all over the fur, blood pooling on the ground within seconds. The blades moved rapidly, Bel's eyes frantically following each dagger carefully. This was another weakness of the maelstrom. It required focus, meaning his attention wasn't on his surroundings. You should never be a solo adventurer. He didn't see nor hear the dungeon lizard that had spawned from the dungeon wall behind him, nor did he hear the dungeon lizard get behind him. But he did feel the large set of claws cleave through his armor and leave a nasty triple gash in his back. He then felt the same claws dig deeper into his back, lift him up and toss him clear across the cavern, colliding with the wall next to the stairs. Bel groaned in pain. His eyes widened in absolute terror as he felt death approach. He looked up to see the kobolds slowly lumber over towards him, while the dungeon lizard leapt up onto the ceiling. It began to crawl over to him, ever so slowly like a predator would. It knew Bel was injured badly, as it could smell Bel's blood from across the cavern. Bel knew his time was going to be cut very short if he didn't get up onto his feet. Using the wall, he slid his back along it, letting out a scream of pain as the wounds dragged and opened wider from the rough rock, but it was all he could do to get up. Staggering slightly, he squared his feet and yanked on the chains, bringing his daggers back to him. The chain wrapped around his forearm as it retracted. So tell me, Ina, Loki said, taking a big swig of the mead as they sat in the closest pub to Babel. What's new? It's always the same, Loki. I process adventurers, help them with advice and other duties. Nothing changes, Ina said, taking a bite into her salad. Loki took another swig and raised an eyebrow. You're saying no new adventurers have caught your attention? The goddess asked. No, of co-def. Ina started, only to pause. This got Loki got grin. So there is someone. Tell me, Loki said, a big grin spreading on her face. She loved gossip. It's not like that, Loki, but there is this child. So innocent. Came up to my desk with the biggest smile and asked to be an adventurer. He didn't have one, so I gave him a map of all the familias of Oreo. It was the day after that I caught him. He was coming out of the dungeon with crystals. That doesn't sound like a problem. I'd like to think it's normal for adventurers to come out of the dungeon with crystals. He came out of the dungeon without a familia. He has no blessings. Ina exclaimed loudly, showing just how frustrated she was with Bel, as well as concerned. Loki merely raised an eyebrow. Well, that is certainly interesting. Are you certain he killed some monsters to get that? Or maybe he just found it like a hound? I don't know for sure. I just know that he went into that place, she said, frowning. Where is this kid now? Loki asked, raising a brow. Did you have anyone stop him? No. He ran out. Little guy is super fast. And what if he tries again? I didn't think to post more guards. I was hoping my anger was enough to stop him from doing it again. Loki smirked at that and hummed. I think you'll find men are generally very stubborn. Wouldn't surprise me that he snuck in there and is already down in the dungeon as we speak, Loki said, finishing off the mug of ale. Ina's eyes widened at that, and she suddenly stood up. I gotta go. I have paperwork, Ina said, dashing out of the pub. Loki raised a brow. She's worried about this kid. And this kid is going into the dungeon without a blessing? Interesting, Loki thought. She finished her meal and left a tip before standing up to follow the half-elf who had ran as fast as she could back to the tower. Screaming with pain and frustration, Bell was on his back once again, this time halfway up the stairs to the second floor. The dungeon lizard had caught up to him and leapt on top. The only thing preventing the lizard from tearing Bell's face apart was Bell's feet pressing against the lizard's chest, trying to kick the monster off. His daggers were holding back the arms of the lizard, keeping the claws from piercing his chest and stomach. Aya! He screamed, knowing that his demise was getting closer and closer, as he could hear the toenails clicking of the kobolds from behind the lizard. He had to act quickly. Deciding to act, he moved his right hand, letting the dagger slip along the lizard's palm, cutting deeply into the creature. The creature howled in pain, giving Bell the opportunity to let his knees come closer to his body before driving the dagger into the lizard's brain, sending it into a grave of ash. Not taking a time to breath, he took the dagger and threw it at the closest kobold, sending the dagger right between the eyes before he did the same with his left, getting the second one in the same spot. Bell was in panic mode. He knew that he needed to get out, but the injuries were so severe and pain. He just couldn't get up. And this was when the last kobold reached him and leapt on top of him, much like the lizard had done. This time, the claws of the kobold were aimed straight down like a dagger itself, aiming right for Bell's face. The kobold's teeth began to gnash as it also tried to make lunch out of Bell's face, but Bell's legs were keeping it at bay. Bell was struggling with both arms to hold the arm of the kobold at bay. The other arm seemed too injured to be used, but it mattered little. Bell was too weak to keep the kobold at bay for much longer. Bell looked around, trying to find a way out, only to spot a rock. He pushed the kobold's arm to the side, slicing into his ear, but also into the ground. With a scream of pain, he grabbed onto the rock and swung it hard, slamming it hard into the side of the kobold's head. With a scream of fury and desperation, Bell began to slam the rock over and over into the kobold, bashing the creature who was squealing in its own pain. Eventually, the kobold disappeared into ash, allowing Bell to finally pass out as the adrenaline finally wore off. Bell didn't know how long he was out, but he was awoken when he felt something digging through his pockets. With a sudden surge of energy, he shot up with the rock in hand, only to halt as he spotted a hooded adventurer whose eyes were wide with his hand in Bell's inner jacket pocket. Sorry, man. I thought you were dead, the adventurer said, removing his hand from his pocket before dashing away, heading up the stairs. Bell dropped the rock and then groaned in pain, reaching over to hold his back. I'm still alive. The wounds aren't fatal, but I need to get them treated. Oh, Cammy, I think I have something for the wounds, Bell said, sitting up straight, before removing his jacket. He lifted his bloody t-shirt up, unable to really look at the wounds on his back. With a groan, he dug into his boot and pulled out a dark red liquid. He pulled out the cork with his teeth, before taking a quick swig of the liquid, before pouring the rest of the liquid onto his back. Unfortunately, his accuracy left much to be desired and most of the liquid did not strike his wounds, but it closed up half of them. Drinking the potion gave him some of his vitality and energy back, allowing Bell to get up to his feet. I need to get out, Bell said. He climbed down the stairs a bit, gathering his daggers as well as the crystals, groaning from the exertion of bending down. He then began making the trek back up, hoping that the path was clear. He wasn't sure he could fight any more monsters. Ina arrived at the counter, looking at the red-haired receptionist. Rose, you haven't seen a boy with white hair and red eyes come through here today, have you? Rose, a werewolf, glanced up from her paperwork into the frantic eyes of her half-elf coworker. Yeah, now that you speak of it. I saw him enter the dungeon this morning. Why? Why didn't you stop him? Was I supposed to? Something the matter with him? He's not in a familia. Oh, well, I didn't know this, but either way, I'm sure he's still down there. Shall we send a rescue team? Yeah, I'll get the paperwork, Ina said, feeling disheartened. She didn't want to think the worst, that Belle was dead. She couldn't take that. He had to be alive. Actually, I think that's him over there, isn't it? Rose pointed behind Ina, who turned. Rose was right. Belle was there and injured. Badly by the looks of it. Ina immediately ran over, gathering the attention of Belle, who was looking down at his feet. When Ina got closer, Belle's eyes widened and fear began to etch across his face. I'm fucked, he thought. The fear of Ina was so great that energy began to flow into him, spreading throughout but mostly into his legs. And with that, Belle began to move to dash away. You get back here, Belle, Ina said, not trying to sound angry but concerned. But as far as Belle was concerned, she was furious and wanted to murder him. Looking behind him and at her with fear, Belle was unaware of his surroundings and did not notice the deity that had entered Babel until he had collided with her. Despite Loki being of a small stature, she wasn't weak physically. She was a goddess after all, and a barely level 1 adventurer would not have the strength to knock her down, especially when they were injured. So when Belle crashed into her, it was like hitting a brick wall. A brick wall that smelled good and was soft. Belle groaned on the ground, laying on his back as his right hand went to his head, holding it as his world spun. So this must be the interesting kid that Ina was concerned about. He's so weak. Why is this kid getting her so wound up? I guess he's kinda cute, like a little rabbit, she thought. She looked up from Belle when Ina arrived. Belle, are you okay? Ina said. The commotion in the tower, in the middle of the day, had gathered quite the number of onlookers. Ina knelt down and tried to help Belle sit up. Ow, ow, ow. Ina, please, Belle begged, trying to lay back down. This got Loki to frown, but she said nothing as she towered over the prone child. Sure, he was of age, but he was still a child. Literally to the goddess and emotionally overall. Sorry. Where does it hurt? Everywhere. I'm so sorry, Ina. Hush. I'll get you some help, she said, gently laying Belle back on the ground before rushing towards her workstation. Belle slowly opened his eyes, fluttering them in pain as the headache of colliding with the brick wall, Loki, began to subside. His eyes widened almost instantly upon catching the beautiful face of the tomboy goddess. Wow, beautiful, Belle muttered, nearly whispering as he stared up at the goddess. Unknown to him, Loki had very good hearing. Outwards, Loki's face turned even more sour, but inside her head, it was a storm. Who is this kid, me? Beautiful? I like women, damn it. I will not let this cute kid make me second-guess this, Loki declared. She decided to speak up. What's your name, kid? She asked, her arms crossed over her nearly flat chest. Belle, miss, he replied, not knowing who she was. Belle, miss? What kind of a stupid last name is that? Loki asked, her face scrunching up. No, my name is Belle Cranel, miss, he replied. Loki raised a brow. You don't know who I am, huh? From the sticks, I reckon. Come here to Rio for adventure, huh? Let me guess. You have big dreams to become rich or something? She asked, hearing it all before. Yes. I'm from a village far away. My grandpa was the one who wanted me to come here to fulfill my dream and his. Oh, and what dream is that? She asked, seemingly intrigued. The dream of any man. To go into the dungeon and have an experience. An experience? She asked, raising a slender brow. To meet a beautiful woman, save her from danger, and marry her. He cried out in pride. Belle was a loopy from the pain, which made him a bit more honest than he normally would be. Pervert, Loki thought with a smirk. I can dig that, she hummed. I see. So you thought you could come to Rio, become some big hero, meet a lot of women and fuck the night away, huh? She said crassly. Exactly, he said with a big grin, before turning to face Ina, who finally arrived with a bottle of healing potion. But first, I must become strong and brave the dungeon, he declared, raising a fist into the air. Ina frowned and pulled his hand down. Not anymore, young man. Not until you join a familia. Now drink this. It'll heal you up, Ina said, basically forcing the liquid down Belle's throat as she tilted it against his lips. Belle drank up the liquid, coughing at the end from how much went down without a breath. Ina, I think I found something to cure my boredom. Loki spoke, though Ina wasn't paying much attention to her. Oh, and what is that? An interesting person, a new familia member. I want Belle Cranel to join my familia, Loki said, a big grin on her face. He was an interesting character and looked like he'll be a source of plenty of entertainment.